Have you ever wondered why two people can grow old side by side, breathe the same air, live under the same sky, yet one fills their later years with pills, hospital rooms, and quiet suffering, while the other wakes each morning with clarity, strength, and peace? I have asked myself that question for more than a century. I am 101 years old. I have watched friends weaken, neighbors fade, whole generations convinced that sickness was simply the price of growing old. They spoke of disease as if it were weather, something that arrived without warning, beyond control, unavoidable. And for a long time I believed it too. But life has a way of correcting us if we are willing to listen. What I learned, slowly, sometimes painfully, is that most chronic diseases do not arrive suddenly. They do not strike like lightning from a clear sky. They are built quietly and patiently through years of small, repeated choices. And if they can be built, they can also be avoided. This is not a story about perfection. I was never perfect. I made mistakes. I ignored warnings. I followed habits simply because everyone else did. But over time, I noticed something undeniable. When my choices changed, my body responded. When I respected it, it returned the favor. When I stopped treating aging as a slow surrender, my health stopped surrendering too. I am not here to deny genetics or accidents or rare conditions that no one can control. Those exist, but they are not the rule. They are the exception. What I am here to tell you from a life fully lived is this: chronic disease is not a destiny written at birth. It is a process, and most processes can be interrupted. Aging does not demand illness. We accept it. And what we accept, we stop questioning. When people hear the word disease, they imagine a moment, a diagnosis, a doctor's voice lowering, a sentence delivered like a verdict. What they rarely imagine is time, the long, quiet years before that moment, when nothing dramatic seemed to be happening at all. That misunderstanding alone has cost countless people their health. Most chronic diseases are not events. They are constructions. They are assembled gradually through repetition, through habits so familiar they stop feeling like choices, through routines passed down as normal, even when they quietly erode the body's ability to repair itself. I learned this by watching patterns, not charts. I watched women my age who ate the same way for decades complain that their bodies had suddenly turned against them. I watched men who slept poorly, moved little, and lived under constant stress speak of illness as betrayal, but the body does not betray, it records. Every day, it takes notes. When you eat, it notes. When you rest or fail to rest, it notes. When you move or sit still, it notes. When you carry stress like a permanent weight, it notes. And one day, it simply reads back what it has been told for years. This is why I reject the idea that disease is random. Random things do not follow patterns so consistently. Random things do not strike entire populations at once. Yet we have entire generations suffering from the same conditions: heart disease, diabetes, joint degeneration, metabolic disorders, all rising together, all increasing in parallel with the same lifestyles. That is not coincidence. That is feedback. People often ask me about genetics. They speak of it as if it were a final sentence already signed. But genes are not commands. They are tendencies. They are possibilities waiting for instructions. And the instructions come from how we live. I have seen families where one sibling collapses under illness by 60, while another remains strong into their 90s. Same parents, same genes, different choices, different outcomes. The body responds to inputs, always has, always will. What made this clear to me was not science textbooks, but change, real change. When I altered how I ate, not chasing trends, not seeking miracles, but choosing consistency, my energy changed. When I learned to rest deeply instead of sleeping poorly, my mind cleared. When I moved daily, gently but faithfully, pain loosened its grip. None of this happened overnight. That is important. Disease takes time to build, and health takes time to restore. This is where many people fail. They want dramatic results from modest effort. But the body does not work on urgency. It works on accumulation, and so does illness. A single poor meal does not create disease. A single stressful day does not destroy health, but thousands of them will. That is why the word optional matters so much. It does not mean effortless, it means interruptible. It means that the chain can be broken before it becomes unbreakable. I want to be clear about exceptions because honesty matters. There are people born with conditions they did not choose. There are rare diseases no lifestyle can prevent. There are autoimmune disorders whose origins are complex and still poorly understood. These are real, and they deserve compassion, not blame. But they are not most cases. Most chronic illness follows predictable paths. It arises where inflammation is allowed to become constant, where blood sugar is pushed beyond balance year after year, where joints are neglected, muscles abandoned, sleep treated as optional, and stress normalized as strength. When people say everyone gets sick eventually, they are not describing biology. They are describing culture, a culture that teaches endurance instead of awareness, a culture that rewards neglect and calls it discipline, a culture that waits for symptoms instead of respecting signals. I lived long enough to see this culture change, and not for the better. Food became faster, work became relentless, rest became guilty, movement became scheduled instead of natural, and illness followed obediently. This is why I speak now, not to frighten and not to promise immortality, but to restore responsibility. Responsibility is not punishment. It is power. If disease were inevitable, there would be nothing to do but wait. But if disease is built, then health can be built too. The body is not fragile. It is adaptive. It adjusts to what it is repeatedly given. When it is given excess, it stores it. When it is given stress without relief, it hardens. When it is given care, it repairs. That is not philosophy. That is lived reality. I am not healthy at 101 because I was lucky. I am healthy because at some point I stopped assuming decline was mandatory. I stopped confusing common outcomes with natural ones. And I accepted that while I could not control everything, I could control far more than I had been told. Most chronic diseases are not inevitable because most of them are the result of long conversations between the body and behavior, and conversations can change direction. By the time people reach old age, they often believe the important decisions are behind them. They speak as if life has already made up its mind about their bodies, as if the future is merely a slow unfolding of what has already been decided. I believed that once too. But a long life teaches you something different. The body is always responding to the present moment. It never stops listening. What changes with time is not the body's ability to adapt, but our willingness to pay attention. Most chronic disease grows in silence. It does not announce itself. It whispers, it nudges, it tightens here, dulls there, disrupts sleep, clouds thought, steals energy a little at a time, and because the changes are gradual, they are easy to dismiss. People call them normal aging, and in doing so, they stop asking questions. That is how choice disappears, not through force, but through familiarity. I learned to listen before the whispers became screams. I learned that the body rarely asks for dramatic gestures. It asks for consistency. It asks for patterns it can trust. When those patterns are missing, it adapts the only way it can, by lowering its expectations of you. Diet was the first place I saw this clearly, not in the language of restriction or fear, but in response. When food was heavy, constant, and excessive, my body grew sluggish. When meals were simple, regular, and respectful of hunger rather than habit, energy returned. This was not about trends or labels. It was about giving the body inputs it could process without constant strain. The same was true for movement. People imagine exercise as something intense or punishing, but the body does not require punishment. It requires use. Muscles that are used remain available. Joints that are moved stay fluid. Circulation responds eagerly to even modest daily motion. Stillness, when prolonged, teaches the body that strength is no longer needed, and so strength leaves. Stress, however, was the most underestimated factor of all. For decades, I carried it proudly. I mistook tension for responsibility, exhaustion for virtue. I did not realize that the body does not understand ambition or obligation. It only understands threat. When stress becomes constant, the body behaves as if danger never ends. Inflammation rises, repair slows. Systems designed for short emergencies are forced into permanent duty. No body can thrive under permanent alarm. Sleep, too, was once sacrificed easily. I'll rest later, people say, unaware that later often never arrives. Sleep is not recovery alone. It is regulation. It is when the body sorts, repairs, recalibrates. Without it, even good choices lose their power. Over time, I learned to protect sleep not as indulgence, but as infrastructure. These things may sound small. That is precisely why they matter. Chronic disease is not usually caused by a single destructive act. It is caused by small neglects repeated until they no longer feel like neglect at all. Choice does not disappear with age. It only becomes quieter. I have watched people change in their 70s and regain vitality they thought was gone forever. I have watched others refuse to change, insisting it was too late, and decline exactly as they expected to. The body responds faithfully to belief expressed through behavior. If you act as if change no longer matters, the body agrees. This is why I reject the language of inevitability. It excuses surrender before surrender is required. Of course, nothing here is a guarantee. Life is not a contract. Accidents happen. Conditions arise. Biology has limits, but probability is not destiny. Risk is not certainty. And most people suffer not because they reached an unavoidable boundary, but because they never tested where the boundary actually was. Health is not fragile. It is resilient when supported, forgiving when respected, and remarkably patient when given time. But patience has limits too. Ignore signals long enough and the body stops whispering. It speaks in diagnoses instead. When that happens, people say, "It came out of nowhere." It rarely did. I do not tell this story to assign blame. Blame is useless. I tell it to return ownership. Ownership is the opposite of helplessness. It is the recognition that while you cannot control everything, you can influence far more than you were taught to believe. Most chronic diseases are optional not because life is fair, but because biology is responsive. It adapts to what you do most often, not what you promise yourself you will do someday. A long life has shown me this truth over and over again. The body is not keeping score of your intentions. It is responding to your patterns, and patterns can be changed. If there is one lesson a long life teaches with absolute clarity, it is this: decline is not a moment. It is a direction, and directions can be changed. I am 101 years old, and I do not say that to impress you. I say it to remove an excuse. Time does not take away choice. We give it away ourselves, little by little, when we decide that effort no longer matters, that signals can be ignored, that illness is simply the cost of staying alive long enough. That belief is far more dangerous than aging itself. Most chronic diseases are not inevitable because they do not arrive fully formed. They emerge slowly, shaped by what we repeat, tolerate, and normalize. And just as they are built through accumulation, they can be resisted the same way, not through perfection, but through persistence. This is not a promise of immunity. Life does not offer guarantees, but it does offer leverage. It offers the quiet power of daily decisions compounded over time. What you eat most days matters more than what you eat occasionally. How you move consistently matters more than rare bursts of effort. How you manage stress, rest, and attention matters more than you realize until it is gone. Aging does not demand surrender. It demands awareness. If you are waiting for certainty before you act, you will wait forever. The body does not require certainty. It responds to direction. When you give it care, it responds with resilience. When you give it neglect, it responds with warning. When warnings are ignored, disease speaks louder. I am still here not because I avoided every mistake, but because I listened when it mattered. I changed when change was still available. And change is almost always available longer than we think. Chronic disease is not destiny written in stone. For most people, it is a path, and paths can be left. The question is not whether aging will happen. It will. The question is whether illness must follow, and most of the time the answer is no.